Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining American Farmland Trust and Good Rain Farm here today. I will start off giving a bit of an introduction to our Women for the Land initiative, and then we'll launch into a conversation with Michelle Week here and give a bit of an introduction for her too. So AFT's Women for the Land initiative has really been expanding its reach and impact in recent years, and the Pacific Northwest is an area where our work is really taking root. Across the region, we've been building our capacity to offer Women for the Land programming, and in this last year, we offered our first learning circle centered around Southern Washington. Our work so far has engaged women and agricultural service providers in both Oregon and Washington to better understand the unique local assets and needs among women in agriculture. From listening and learning from those already leading in this space, we're observing that AFT has a critical role to play in supporting women in agriculture to activate their potential in alignment with AFT's mission of protecting farmland, keeping farmers on the land, and promoting sound farming practices. The women we'll be speaking with in this profile series are among the region's farmers who inspire us and are helping to guide us on this journey to lift up the stories of women in agriculture in the Pacific Northwest. In the age of climate disruption, they exemplify resourcefulness, grit, and dedication to their profession. We're thrilled to have the opportunity to learn more from them, to hopefully inspire other women farmers and ranchers in the region, and clarify how service providers like AFT and our partners can best enable their ongoing success. We're thrilled to have Michelle Week with us here today of Good Rain Farm. She is a first-generation female native farmer based in Portland, Oregon. She's the owner and operator, of Good Rain Farm. It's also referred to by its Sinixed name, a traditional language of the Arrow Lakes peoples. Michelle runs a 1-acre mixed produce CSA, raises a lot of things, which we'll talk about today, heritage meat rabbits. And we're really excited to speak with her about how she's navigating challenges and pursuing opportunities. So let's start off here. And I will say in terms of housekeeping that we will have a comment stream on a couple of our platforms. Feel free to integrate questions in there. We'll be talking with Michelle and have some questions that we have settled. But if there are questions that come up, we'll look at patterns and potentially integrate those into our conversation today as well. So in our Win for the Land learning circles, one of the key tenets that we really organize around is that all kinds of agriculture has a place and that all farmers and agricultural landowners can do better by the land. Michelle, could you briefly describe what really led you to your work in agriculture and what activates you to continue committing your energy to farming?
Yeah, why Hasliquas. Hello, good morning. Isquis Michelle. My name's Michelle. I go by she, her pronouns, and I'm just really stoked to be here today. On Husquiet, Good Rain Farm, I was drawn to farming because I continued to peel back the layers of where our food comes from. So I started shopping at farmers markets and food co-ops in my college years. Before that, in high school, my mom liked to send us on errands under this guise of freedom. And so I was often in charge of grocery shopping. So I'd come back with big grocery bills and all this organic food. And she'd be like, yes, those apples were on the grocery list. I don't know if I budgeted for this, but it was kind of my way of inching our family towards healthier eating and more environmentally friendly eating. And so in 2016, I was kind of spurred to action to do a thing that I both loved and was passionate about, and that was growing food and food for our community. So we started a big garden and ended up selling some that year to a restaurant, which I was like, oh, this is a job. Aha. I feel so silly having that moment of of course this is a job. People do this. Yeah, so as I've continued to kind of grow the garden more into a farm, more of an economy of scale to kind of be able to actually derive a living income from it, I've continued to focus on kind of food sovereignty work and that intersection of social justice with environmentalism, and how those two things interact in our food system, and kind of continue to explore that and kind of push the boundaries of the government and economy that we're kind of inside, right? Where can I find the edges that I can scooch out and stretch and kind of challenge a little bit? So that's Husquia is just kind of continues to grow all on its own. We call it a little monster. I don't know what I've created. But definitely exploring where our food comes from and what is food, right? So a lot often the farm kind of grew underneath this Oregon white oak grove on a family parcel, and I got curious by those acorns. So the farm was initially just about fresh foods and exploring and that transparency of fresh foods. And as I kind of explored these Oregon white oaks and this acorn and the flower and their ecosystem, which often includes camas lilies and hawthorn and hazelnuts, right? There's all these bracken ferns grow out there. So I've kind of started exploring these plants in this theme of like food and controlled burning and indigenous stewardship of those oaks. How they managed to live so long and how the controlled burns help reduce the evergreen pressure. The Douglas firs love to grow super fast and overshadow them and kill them, right? So that kind of really brought in the indigenous side of who I am and my identity growing up, but also of farming and what is farming and what is food. So we really doubled down on indigenous food sovereignty and resiliency in our area through kind of that lens. But I would definitely say that feels more accidental than intentional. And but I really enjoy learning more about who I am and who I come from and this ecosystem we live in, and just how much we're intertwined in these ecosystems, and how much these oaks in particular depend on our stewardship and support and community, just as much as we depend on them. So that's a little bit of where Husquia came from.
That's a fantastic story. And I think it's so obvious. Food connects us all, but it's so obvious that for you, there's been this just deeper meaning and interest and curiosity that's really blossomed now into something that can dedicate your life towards, this farming venture, which is really exciting. So you explained a bit about how you evolved into where you are now. Can you talk about more the day-to-day? What does it look like to be on your farm for a day? I'm sure it's very different based off of the day, but could you describe that for us?
Yeah, I have seasons, farm duties. In the peak season in the summer, we work, I work with a crew of interns and employees now, Monday through Wednesday. We get up usually up at the farm 7 or 8 a.m. and just to beat the heat, afternoon heat. So we're usually done by 1 or 2. Yeah, we get up, we harvest stuff fresh in the morning when it's cooler out, when it's less wilty. Unless of course you want like a sun heated tomato. We wait till the later evening for those, because it's just fun to snack on them too. And then there's a whole section to wash your pack and seeding and transplanting, and then we get into weeding, so they get kind of fried in the sun as we pull them up by the roots. But a little like our weeding is kind of hodgepodge, just because what is a weed? It's just an unfortunately located poor plant. So sometimes I end up leaving weeds or working around them. Yeah, I mean, those are most of the days. It's a lot of field prep on Thursdays and Fridays. a lot of teaching and education Monday through Wednesday. This year we're looking at farmers markets on the weekends, so we'll see how that goes, if that feels chaotic or not. And right now, though, in like the winter season, it's a lot of bureaucratic paperwork, as I call it, or administrative work. So we're doing, I'm filling out PDFs to send back to the NRCS and the USDA, or to my landlord, or renewing leases, or catching up on bills, annual bills that come up, right? So there's just reviewing the internship curriculum, reviewing CSAs, making sure all our vendors are straight and on board. So there's there's a lot of administrative work right now, updates to websites and stuff. I had no idea that I would become a bookkeeping, website designer, graphic design, marketing, curriculum development person when I decided to get my hands in the dirt. But that all seems so, it's integral to running a business, but it also just is how we get our message out and communicate with each other, right? And share the story of this place we live in.
Yeah. You're touching on this quite a bit of your philosophy towards the land, and even your definition of weeds, and how you're looking at different plants, and just that you can really dive into all of that. But I'd be curious about if you could encompass your farming philosophy, and how it maybe has adapted as we grow up in this age of climate change, or if you see it adapting even from when you started to now.
Yeah. I mean, I started from a very young age. I was very concerned about climate change. I mean, elementary, that was the late 90s for me, millennial. And it has always been a concern. My understanding of climate change and how we can tackle it has become a lot more complicated and nuanced over the years. It used to feel a lot more cut and dry, like buy organic, buy local, and now I'm a little more loosey-goosey around kind of that idea, just because of accessibility issues. But I would mostly define the work we do on Hosquiet along the lines of traditional ecological knowledge. So it's a lot more influenced and dominated by kind of a what's the word? Just kind of by heart and senses and observations, right? I'm more guided by intuition than I am all of the science. Now, I've attended a lot of workshops, and I continue to attend lots and lots of workshops because I didn't really study. I studied cultural ecology when I was lucky enough to go to college, which is really just kind of the study of place and how people connect to place, which is also in itself kind of a loosey-goose study. But I didn't study like agriculture, right? Like I didn't study this. I didn't get an ag science degree, right? They make those. So I try to take as much as I can and learn as much as I can. And that definitely influences and helps me communicate what it is that I'm doing when I'm talking to financial institutions, or when I'm talking to the USDA or NRCS or other technical advisors, or people who I'm receiving funding from or technical support from. So even lawyers and realtors and whatnot, right? These are all very like suit and tie professions. And when I come in with traditional ecological knowledge, it doesn't always quite mesh. So taking on these classes have helped me kind of find the words to bridge that cultural gap there that exists between kind of Western science and like indigenous observation, which observation is science, right? So
Absolutely.
It's completely valid. But it's interesting to have to dig deep for those words sometimes.
Sure. That's so interesting that you talk about, I've heard of traditional ecology, the acronym is TEK. So when you talk about that and just the generations and generations that go into stories of the land and connection to the land, and ultimately so many of the farmers that I've worked with, the reason they're farming, sure, is maybe because they decided to study agricultural science and then go into farming, but it is because we have a heart pull towards the land. It's so much deeper than that. So I really appreciate you touching on that, and it's evident too as we're talking just how much of the intuition that you've described and your emotion to the land too comes through in your work. It's really inspiring to me, and I know it's one of the reasons I'm involved in this too in a different way. But
Yeah.
I would be curious. You talked about the really looking into the past, exploring this historical TEK to inform your presence, and you're using intuition through that. How do you see the future of your farm, and how do you see that evolving and changing as time goes on?
Yeah, it's scary to think about the future, um, and uh, and inspiring, and exciting. Um, so I think at Husqvarna, I've kind of, you know, we've been finding community, which is so fun and exciting, around this. And so I really hope that the future of the farm will continue to feed our community more and more so, and lean more towards making food accessible. And we have some big dreams about what that could look like and be. Um, and it's an interesting place to be because we could dream real big, but then I also have like reality to fit into right now. So constantly thinking about what would a non-capitalist economy look like, and how would we fit into that, and how can we support that transition? So how could I survive and thrive and support my community in thriving within capitalism as it is now, as we experience it today, but also push those boundaries into some other economy system, right? Economy is just a system of resource ins and outs, right? Like people have engaged in some form of economy forever, really. um, and that's just, how do we view the world around us, and view the legitimacy of being of all of the plants and the animals and other impacts that we experience throughout our lives. So I'm kind of curious to see how the future of the farm looks in that regard, and how we end up pushing that different connection to the land and place that we are in. But I also, when I think of the future of the farm, I hope that it's secure, that right now when I think of the future of the farm, like I'm thinking about my exit strategy, which is a very like odd thing. I think you don't hear a lot of farmers talk about exit strategies. But I'm always kind of like, at one point I want to retire and relax. And how do I do that? And how do I make sure that this farm continues to exist, for future generations, even once I've passed on, right? Once I'm gone from this place, I want the farm to continue to be able to feed and support community. So I think about security, and then safety and access are other components of this, that I want to make sure the farm is a safe place to be, but also a safe place to travel to, and that people are traveling from safe places through safe places to a safe place. And I think right now, like, would we look at this urban rural divide, it is a little frustrating, how unsafe it can feel, to travel, and that the farmland is so much further out. And so that access to land, that access to fresh food, that access to safety is something I think about when I think about the future of the farm. I want to make sure that it's a safe place for all. And and I'm always working on myself. I think we like always need to be working on ourselves. We're never perfect. So and hopefully that slowly gets better generation to generation, person to person. But yeah, there's this, affordable farmland. It really depends how much acreage do you want, what kind of resources do you want to make sure you have on that acreage, and how far are you able to travel? What's the cost of that traveling, right? When we talk about climate change, how much CO2 and pollution am I spewing when I drive the produce to the viable markets and back and forth, and how do we make sure we both support those in a rural area but also reach those markets of more affluence to help support our mission of access. That is just like one of the many like existential crises. I feel like I could go down wormholes around these things.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, there's so much fodder there, and you're talking too about the adaptation of markets and all these complex systems that exist far past just what you can control more directly, which is your farming, creating safety in that space. But there's so many other systemic issues that are feeding into what climate change impacts, what farming looks like on the ground. You talked a little bit, and I think you might have mentioned this at the beginning of our conversation, but you just touched on land access, and AFT does work around land access, land tenure, and trying to do more in that space. Be curious what your journey in land access has been, because you just introduced it and talked about it. Are you on family land, or did you start somewhere and you have more land now? What has your path looked like?
Yeah, I started off on family land, and it was both beneficial and extremely distracting. um, and we've since relocated from that location. We got accepted to a Headwaters Farm Incubator out in Gresham. We also rented land over in Washington. So I've always kind of straddled. We've always supported both Clark County and Multnomah County. So the really that Portland metro whole is who we're really supporting and feeding. And yeah, so I had that land in Washington. So now we're relocating from that to another location. So all these locations I rent, I drive back and forth between, and really kind of stretch my time really thin. Just all of that travel. And then again, we talk about like CO2 emissions and all this driving. So I try to make them really worthwhile. But yeah, so we've rented all of our land, and having to leave multiple parcels has been really stressful and straining and frustrating. To have to move pretty much every year that the farm's been founded has made it really difficult to kind of establish really the Pacific Northwest first foods that I would like to focus on. So being able to establish those perennial plants has been really difficult to grow at a capacity and a yield that I can actually share those foods with people, and that's been really frustrating. And when I look at the cost of buying land, like it's been, and I have these conversations a lot with a lot of different people, and I recently was talking to a realtor in a group of farmers, and they were like, well, farmland doesn't cost that much. And I was like, where is this farmland you're talking about? Well, it's 40, 60 minutes outside of the Portland metro area. I'm like, cool. And it's also like 50 acres. And I'm like, what am I going to do with 50 acres? I'm not at that scale yet as a farm to really like make great use of 50 acres, 60 minutes out of town. Now you're asking me for like a minimum of 2 hours to drive the food into town and come back, right? It's 2 hours out of a day. It turns an 8-hour workday into a 10-hour workday into a 12-hour workday, right? And And so, yeah, the price per acre on 50 acres that far out of town might actually be affordable, but the time stress that puts on us and the larger balloon down payment to purchase that is beyond my capacity. So I would rather pay, unfortunately, a higher per acre price point for maybe 10 acres that is 30 minutes outside of town, right? Because I could actually afford that down payment, possibly. That is also very, it's really expensive. And I haven't really kept super high tabs on what farmland costs, but I imagine if it has a acceptable, livable home on it, it's going to be in the $500,000 price range minimum. Because I know those suburban houses are going for $300,000. Those are cookie cutter homes on an old golf course. So, I know that's kind of I've just decided to think about it as $500,000. So we talk about 10% down payments on that to even gain access to the land that I would need to really make a huge impact with the farm. And that's it's frustrating, right? And I hear from folks where I'm participating in this transitioning the land, transitioning farms workshops. And you hear about folks who estate taxes sneak up on them. You have multiple siblings who all want a cut of the pie. The pie is tied up, the money pie is tied up to the farm business and the farmland. And so they end up subdividing farmland and selling off farmland to then buy out siblings so that they can continue the family farm, and they're lucky enough to even have a family farm to continue. Whereas I'm starting from scratch essentially, and trying to find my place here it's been difficult and really interesting. My exploration through renting land has been this very tumultuous experience. Most people who want to support farmers and rent out their land have this idyllic idea of what a farm is, these beautiful, perfect rows of food, and there aren't piles of crap everywhere. I have piles of crap. I when I'm driving by someone's farm, I'm like, ooh, that's a good junk pile. I wonder what they got in there. It's not what people have in mind. And so they'll be offering what is essentially decent farmland, but it won't have electricity, it won't have Wi-Fi, it won't have water rights, it won't have any buildings, no barn, no storage, no nothing. So we're essentially starting with scratch, and they have this perfect idea of what a farm is, and that's just not congruent with the reality of what small farming really is. And it just causes a little more extra work on my end. And I've even engaged in conversations with people who basically laid out their lease, and it was tenant farming. And that's just not, I don't want to go back. I don't want to go backwards in this. I don't want to farm and let you just take all and everything you want, but also have you expect a business plan from me. I don't know how I'm supposed to project financials and yields and create a business plan when I have no idea what chunk of the yield and fruit this landlord's going to be pulling out of the farm, which is going to impact my ability to be financially sustainable. So yeah, land access is complicated and interesting. And then that was one of those things where I said earlier, there's this culture shock when I talk to realtors who think they have a great deal. And I'm like, I don't have that down payment, or I don't have that capacity, or I don't have that time to drive that far. So, yeah, it's a lot more complicated, I think, than a lot of folks realize. I appreciate that a lot of folks want to share their land and rent to farmers, but renting also just doesn't allow for fruit trees. to be planted.
Sure. And you just spoke to so much related to just economic viability and travel and the day-to-day necessities of what being on a farm look like. You spoke to it so well, and I'm curious, in your process of looking at properties, what does that look like? You're involved in so many community groups. Is it that because you have such a heart pull to the land, to me, when I look at you and you have this, what I see as a thriving business and such commitment to farming, and yet you've had to move around every year, it sounds like that's shows so much resiliency. And I'd be curious, like, how are you doing that? How are you identifying these new properties or a better property for you to move to, and what does that look like when you've had to transition out of it?
Yeah. It's been stressful. It's distracting. I think, we could be doing so much more if I wasn't tied up in all of the conversations that all the different types of communication, the stress, the exhaustion of having to move farm location to farm location, right? All of that time and energy could be funneled into other programming that we could do on Hosquiet. Yeah, I guess, yeah, yeah, it's tiring. I think, like, ultimately we would love to own our land in some form. And when I am looking for land, there is a lot of conversation before we decide to sign a lease. And I've been trying to kind of, right now with the farm incubator, they're very used to and comfortable with annual food production. So I do the majority of that at that location, and I have the opportunity there to kind of expand the acreage that we do that on. And then the other property is actually now my other parents' property, who has over the years talked about and had planted some pear trees and things, but is busy, life is busy. And so I kind of approached them and I was like, can I do more of the perennial plants, expand this orchard and this blueberry field, and sign a lease with you where I do that work for you, which is in line with this thing you've slowly been doing. Mm-hmm. So, but it's a lot of conversations, and that's with a parent who I'm making sit down and read a lease with, who we talk about water access with, who we talk about how I access that property for business and business hours. And it's a really detailed lease that I'm gonna, we're gonna sign and agree to. And so really making sure we have those kind of clear boundaries, or bumper rails, as we always call them on the farm, of just kind of like what is guiding us and hemming us in, to be more clear about what I need, and tamper expectations on the landlord's side of what they should be expecting from us and what they should not be expecting from us. Yeah.
That's great. No, security and safety just really seem like a theme through this conversation, whether it's through leases or literally on the ground. And you mentioned this, but I would be curious, how are the land use patterns and development pressure in the Portland area influencing your operation and experience in agriculture? You've spoken to it a bit, but I'm sure that you're seeing it happen around you. And what has that looked like?
Oh, yeah. Clark County in Washington has some of the best farmland west of the Cascades for the west side of the state. And they're paving over it like there's no tomorrow. They're moving so fast with single family homes left and right. McMansions, 1 acre ex-bourbon lots. You knock down all the alder trees and call it Alder Grove neighborhood. It's like, I've watched it my whole life, that kind of sprawl and degradation and disrespect for our food. And it really, it really feels like, biting the hand that feeds us. We're constantly destroying and paving over the very soil and land that is going to feed us, that secures our food resiliency and security going forward. And we're overshadowing it with all of these homes. And I'm not here to say that people can't move here or can't live here, but I do hope to see smarter development, more condensed development, and being really honest about why someone feels the need to live in a suburban or exurban home. Like so many of the neighbors out in Washington where I farmed, they're like, I wanted space. I needed space. It's so crowded, and they have 2.5 kids. And they sit there on their riding lawnmower mowing 1.5 acres of field grass, pretending like it's a front lawn. And it's just a little bizarre to me. I can't quite, I'm like, and then they spend all their time driving to all the soccer events, right? Like, I'm like, I don't quite understand like what kind of space folks are really after, because they seem to be leaving that home into more crowded, more social spaces anyways, and just spending more time in the car to do so. And spending more time mowing lawns instead of hiking through forests or growing gardens. So I find it's really disheartening to me and sad to have watched as fields get paved over, as like the horses next to my elementary school were eventually relocated, and there's a strip mall there now. It's really sad to see that much farmland and open space just disappear for the sake of commercialization, for consumption of plastic goods that we don't really need. And it drives up the price of the land at the same time. So simultaneously, they're like, oh, well, farming's on the decline in Clark County. And you're like, well, yeah, because the price of that land is going up, and people can't afford to continue to pay those land taxes, those rising property taxes. They can't, the zoning changes, and they can't keep doing what they've been doing. And also, like, all of a sudden, you put a 4-lane thoroughfare through next to a farm, and it's just all those toxic metals wafting off and splashing off and draining off of those roads are not exactly where I would want to grow my leafy lettuces or anything either. And even out at the incubator farm that I'm at, like, they sold off a chunk of that land, and now there's 10 1-acre parcels there with their McMansions. And then someone from that community then complained that, like, the gravel road to the farm was kicking off too much dust. And I was just like, do you know where your food comes from? Like, do you, like, you do realize you moved into the farmland, right? Like, the farmland didn't encroach on you. So to be complaining about the thing that was already there is a little mind-blowing to me. So yeah, I find that, I appreciate that there's an urban growth boundary around here, and I think there should be a lot more of it. I think smarter growth. And I think people really ought to, like, take a look at the kind of selfish reasons why they feel they need that space of a 1-acre lawn to mow. Like, I don't understand that entitlement to mow a 1 acre of grass. Like, I don't, I'm like, can I farm that, please? Like, can you, like, I'd be happy to grow food on that and feed our community. So I don't know. It's heartbreaking.
It is heartbreaking. And thank you for speaking so much to that, especially talking about the finiteness of land and soil. AFT last year released a report called Farms Under Threat, State of the States, where they looked at development pressures. And so for anyone interested who's watching, definitely check that report out. But speaks to what Michelle's experience alludes to as well. And there's definitely a a cultural difference and a lot more at play here when we talk about farmland protection. You just talked about community and feeding your community. And so I know we can go down the wormhole of development pressure, and there's so much there, but I like to bring us out and talk to you about your connection to community as well, and what role you feel like your farm plays in the community, and how your farm furthers your vision of being in a community. It sounds like there's so much related to food and healthy food and locality and not having to drive too far. Can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah. So we focus a lot and grapple with access and what does that really mean? And access of travel. So being able to have the privilege to travel to a farm, to visit a farm, to see it. Physical access to farming, to be a farmer. Just like the ableism that comes with farming as an industry overall, like how do we work on making sure that it's accessible to all folks, being creative with what that really means, and honest about what that really means, and making sure we get food to people in a way that they can actually utilize it, has also been a big part of our focus. We do a certain amount of in-house fundraising for a scholarship fund where people can gift money to it, and then we turn around and free of charge, like it's a pay it forward kind of program where free of charge we offer our CSAs to community members, and they're extremely appreciative and they're using it. But I do notice a struggle to actually turn like a raw food box into a meal. Having that time, having all the right tools, having access to a kitchen area, and then having a meal to eat as a result, can also be a barrier. So I find that sometimes people pass up the food boxes because they can't actually utilize it. We just turn into compost essentially. And so how do we create like prepared meals so that we compete with McDonald's and compete with that convenience, understanding that someone is also constrained on time and energy and resources. And so being able to just be able to whip out a meal, heat it up or not, and just have it ready to eat cold. What does that look like for us and the farm going forward? How do we serve those community members and help them, help uplift them and take that stressor off of their plate? And I've been surprised sometimes by how much community the farm has attracted, and humbled by it. I am just like, I'm blown away sometimes by folks' passion and willingness to support me and this farm. And it's really exciting. Some of the other things we do with community, so we've been trying to think of other ways to like support those folks who've really come out and support the farm, and how do we show up for them, and how do we do little pop-up events. And time of COVID is complicated things, but how can we do accessible farm tours? How could we show up in the communities they're already located in? When we look at like our CSA drop site hosts, we're looking at legal things and agreements with people, just like the nuts and bolts. But we also look at, is there a bus that runs nearby? How accessible is that neighborhood and sidewalks? And is there like a parking spot set aside for folks to slip into and out? Will people of color or other identities feel welcomed in that particular neighborhood? And how do we ensure that they feel comfortable in that neighborhood? So how do we work with our site hosts to communicate with their neighbors about what's happening, and how to join up and how to be part of that community, and kind of how do we welcome people into spaces for that pickup and make sure everyone feels safe and welcomed? We take into considerations ADA access. Are there staircases? Are there push buttons for doors? Like, can people access where we're dropping off these boxes? And those have definitely been, a few instances where we've had to say thanks, but no thanks. This is not an accessible site for some folks. And I'm not about to track down all the folks and ask, do they or do they not need that access? We just baseline, make sure we have that access, and make that normal and make that okay. But we're working on on a seed saving education box as well. So folks can prepay buy into that, and it's like a buy one, gift one program. So they can, so every time one gets purchased, one also gets donated, and it'll be education for saving seed. Folks get to save seed, get to hopefully plant it in their own home gardens or a community garden. We're working with various community partners who have access to land as well to start bridging those gaps and connecting people and building that knowledge base so that we have more resiliency in our local food region. So, community it's huge, it's big, and it's everything. We're always trying to look at it from a lens of making sure there's access and safety, and making sure people have an opportunity to learn something, and to be involved and support, and also for us to show up to help support too.
Thanks for speaking so beautifully to the difference between a space being accessible and being a place of belonging and being welcoming, because I do think that there's a difference there. We talk a lot about accessibility, but what does it look like to switch and turn into a place that feels safe and like you're supposed to be there, like it's a place for you. You're talking about the way that you are supporting your community, and I would be curious in any peers or mentors that you've really utilized. Can you speak to the peers or mentors that might have been really impactful for you, and then how you might be also supporting, whether you have any mentees that you've been supporting?
Yeah. I mean, I could give you a big long list of farmers and people who've helped me navigate all that there is to farming. And it's growing every day. There's always more people to make connections with. I've been told I'm a good networker. And I just like to talk to people and be like, well, how do you do things? Why do you do it that way? And sometimes I'm sure they get a little annoyed, like, stop asking why. But I'm really curious about like that thought process of like, the pros and the cons and how other people weigh those pros and cons. So I have lots of people out there who've helped me a lot, and that community has been great. And then, there's been a lot of self-study in all of this as well. Serious crash course taking. I feel like when I'm kind of navigating the resources and the people out there, sometimes I come kind of crashing in like a bull in a china shop. I just show up and I'm like, hey, so you're gonna tell me this thing now, and like, okay, spit it out, like let me in on it. Or yeah, so and as far as like, I guess, I mean, I run the internship program, which was a little bit of I needed help and support, and I only just began paying myself 4 years into this business. Only just recently have I been actually able to like pull enough money to pay rent and whatnot with it. So originally I couldn't afford to pay myself, let alone others. But I knew I was decent at outdoor education. I work as an outdoor educator as a second job outside of the farm, and I had experienced an apprenticeship that I really enjoyed, that I got a lot out of, and that was super supportive. And so I wanted to be able to continue to offer that as an option to folks. I just love it. I really love watching people just get blown away. Every Monday when they show up, the plants have grown a bunch and there's all this like commotion about how much the plants have grown. I'm there like every day. I don't notice these things, right? And or just this like, right, like I remember learning that and being like, what? That's how this works? Like, that's a miracle. This is amazing. Like, how does a little seed turn into like a bajillion tomato plants, right? That are 8 feet tall. It's just a jungle monster chaos area. You trellis your tomato plants. We're never not trellising tomato plants again. That was utter chaos. But that wonderment and excitement, it fills me up. It reminds me that this isn't just like day in, day out work, right? It could become very monotonous, like just get it done, put your head down, do it over and over and over again. And having other people on the farm and teaching people and educating and kind of opening up those doors of this world to people has been really inspiring and fun for me. And I love having the reminders of that. So I love running the internship program, and I love staying in connection with my past interns and supporting other young farmers who are coming in on the scene and answering questions when I can. And that's been something that we've been kicking around a little bit. So now I have like a management team who were all interns essentially, who are now peers of mine who we're all working on the farm, trying to think of how can the farm become a worker co-op and whatnot. So technically they're employees. I think of them more as coworkers who keep me on track as much as I keep them on track. And like we've been kind of kicking around an idea of like what would mentorship look like on a more like bigger scale, just because my time gets so constrained. There's a lot of stuff happening and going on, so making sure that we set aside time to support, like intentionally, meaningfully support others is kind of the goal with creating some sort of mentorship program that I can continue to stay in contact not only with past interns but just the broader community who's starting out as well.
Sure. And that's such a good segue, I think, into, as you are looking into creating support systems that might exist out of traditional support networks, be curious to, have you utilized kind of those traditional support systems for agriculture, institutions like NRCS or other field service providers? And if you have, what has that experience been like? And is there ways for those systems to better be poised to support you?
Yeah, I will use any and all resources. Like I said, I do a lot of self-study. I've been doing a lot of educational courses, and a lot of them are through soil water conservation districts. Have been really helpful. The USDA seems to kind of like hide. They don't really just like show up and are like, hey, we're here to help. They're usually like behind a table fidgeting at a conference, and you have to like go approach them and start poking them to get info out of them. And then they're very elusive, and all of their answers are not very concrete. But that's fine. We're starting to develop a relationship with our USDA regional agent and start to explore what kind of support we can get, or what kind of funding we can achieve through that. Yeah, and like I said earlier, there's a lot of being smart about the words I use when communicating with people, right? So I have to kind of figure out how they want me to say it and then say that to get to receive the support that I'm after. Because if I were to explain it in the more comfortable terms and in like the framework of social good and giving away, free boxes and buy one gift ones and all this social good that we try to do in a in a farming practice that is more aligned of traditional ecological practices and kind of outside of organic or regenerative ag or those terms, it gets very confusing for folks, or they think that I don't know what I'm talking about, or that I'm not doing it the right way or the most like financially stable way. So that's been interesting space to navigate the more traditional support systems out there, because they want to hear it in a more Western science academic kind of language. And I've straight up had people come out to the farm and I was like, oh yeah, we're decolonizing diets. And this one person looks at me and is like, well, that's rude. And I was like, what? Like, so it's interesting to like work with people and have to be really particular about the words you choose to explain the thing you're doing, to really sell them on it and get the support you need. I think we get a lot of misconceptions, even from recent landlords who were just like, well, that's a weed. And I was like, actually, we're intentionally growing that to bundle and serve in our CSAs, right? Like, please don't mow that down. Please don't spray it. Please don't do whatever you think you need to do to that perceived weed, as we're going to consume it because it's a first food. So legitimizing that foods are good and that they're okay. Growing a lot of our heritage foods, like a lot of heritage foods ended up heritage because they don't yield at the like amount that the Green Revolution would like agriculture yields to be, right? And so that's part of what's driving that extinction in those. And then turning around and choosing to pretty much grow only heritage foods, and primarily heritage foods, and take a hit on that yield, confuses a lot of folks too. So
it sounds like an opportunity could be that institutions might adopt more literacy around traditional ecological knowledge and sharing that language a bit more, so that you don't have to adapt as much to a different language, but perhaps there's more literacy sharing across. And thank you. This has been such a robust conversation. There's so many more things I would love to talk to you about. We only have a couple minutes, and so curious, I'll close us out pretty soon, but what, if you have any final thoughts or advice you might like to share with those who are on this call or who might watch it after, who are really looking to you as an example?
I mean, know what you want, ask for it, and continue to ask for it. And if that means having to shift how you talk about it, like ultimately you'll get the support and the funding and the resources you need to do the thing you're doing. So it's an odd form of manipulation, and ends to a means to an ends, right? And do it. Start and do it. And it's never kind of the right time to do anything. So just go for it, and make it happen. And I think passion and a drive to do it will get you where you're trying to go.
Thank you so much. We truly can't thank you enough for taking your time out of your schedule to share your story with us, our viewers who may be tuning in later. I think you are incredible and tenacious, and I'm so grateful for your energy that you shared with all of us today. So here at AFT, we feel excited to weave this conversation in with our other profiles that we'll be doing on women in the region. We hope everyone listening today will stay tuned for more stories and photos from these incredible farmers. And thank you, Michelle, again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.